Hey guys, how you going? Welcome to the Positive Experience podcast, where we look at the good, the bad and the ugly in living your best life. Today's segment is called In the Trenches, where we look behind the scenes at what's happening in the clinic. Hey guys, welcome back to the Positive Experience, the Trenches episode between my friend Mike and I. We will be discussing his recent efforts in running, and not just standard running, trail running, which is really interesting. It's not a world that I come from. So I'd like to start first, Mike, in maybe introducing the idea of running. When, why, and how did you come about it?
Yeah, so I guess it all started during this whole COVID period where, we don't have access to the weights that we normally would having the gyms open. So for me, I'm not huge on working out in my room. I don't really, have the space to do all the lifts that I wanted to do. And there isn't much of a motivation factor when you have those people around you. I think it's a big motivator when you're in the gym. Everyone's on the same mission. So I looked at something else more outdoors. And for me, I was always intrigued by endurance kind of sports, like how someone can put themselves through such a difficult task for a prolonged period. For me, it was really interesting, like what kind of mental toughness this person have to be able to do that. So I thought I'd put myself under the same stress, put myself in the experiment tank. So yeah, once I started that, I then had a chance to gauge what my fitness was like, and just as I mentioned in my blog, it was pretty bad. So my first 3-kilometer run was the typical loop that I found around my place. It took me about 30 minutes, so that 10-minute per kilometer average is what I started with. And if you would see that most people could actually walk faster than that. So it was a pretty taxing effort for me. Like my body was not used to that kind of stimulus at all for that, especially trying to hold that intensity. I mean, I did play basketball growing up, so that kind of stop, start I was used to, but that prolonged period really took it out of me.
Okay, so you're trail running, right? So this isn't your normal running the pavement. So could you give us an idea of what it actually means? Like, what does the track look like that you're running on?
Yeah, so it's more uneven terrain. So it could be between the road, path, and as well off-road. So between parks that I go through. So I guess the challenge there is more so the uneven surfaces than anything.
Cool. And what equipment are you using to track your numbers?
Yeah, so for me, I've got my phone and my watch in particular. I like something lightweight. For me, I just use either the Apple Watch activity app. I can have that tracking, and as well, I do have a Strava account. So I find that gives a few more factors in there. So some things that Apple Watch doesn't give, the Strava app does cover. As well, it has a cool map that shows you kind of where your intensity was, which segment you were the fastest in, slowest in, how it compares to your other segments. So for me, Strava and the Apple Watch activity app is the one to go to.
Okay, wow. So with the tracking of your numbers, you have a general idea of what you want to hit. So if you started with what you've just mentioned, so 10K, for your 4K run in total, is that right? So
3K. Yeah.
What would you like to see in the next, say, 3 months, 6 months? What's your target?
Yeah, so that was my first one ever. My current split, I've managed to hit 4 minutes 58 per kilometer. So it's hard. That's taken a while to get there, and hopefully still going a bit lower. I'd say when I was first running and I tried that 10-minute per kilometer split, I was aiming for just something less. I mean, I didn't really have a specific number in mind. Like, I wanted to get to 5 minutes per kilometer. I was just telling myself, this is where you are, and it's okay because it's your first time trying it. But as I put my body under this load, I'm expecting at least to get, perhaps 30 seconds more. I'm not trying to do a minute, 2 minutes. I think that's a big jump from where you currently are. But I'd say if you're trying to maybe cut 15 seconds off your per kilometer average to begin with, that's a good starting point.
Perfect. And that leads right into one of the points that you introduced in your blog post, where you're telling or recommending to the readers about pacing yourself. One of the ways that you can rate your effort is through something called a perceived exertion scale. So could you give us the nuts and bolts on what that is and how it helps?
Yeah. So for me, this was like an epiphany moment once I figured this out, because the whole running thing was a massive mental hurdle. Every time I wanted to go for a run, I'm like, geez, it's such a taxing effort. Like, how am I going to get through this? Until I finally understood that, look, you don't have to go gun ho. I definitely have that personality that when I'm out the gate, any activity, I just want to do it as hard as I can, as best as I can. But then I realized with running, pacing is really good, especially when you're going for a long run. So, for example, if you look at the Borg scale of perceived exertion, you've got 0, which is pretty much you're at rest, not doing anything. And then 10 on the other side of the spectrum is your absolute maximal effort. So you can't be holding a conversation while running. So you're really struggling at this point. So for me, I was really trying to stay towards a high end, that kind of 7, 8, towards the end, hit that 9, 10. And that's when it was a really taxing effort. And I found myself having to walk in between my runs because it's just too hard. But when you're running instead, it's easy to just begin steadily. So kind of around that 4, maybe 3 even to begin with, slowly bring yourself up. And then if you do find that is a bit taxing, you could always bring it down. I think for me, that was the thing that was a bit of a trick. It's like you could always just slow your pace a bit down because the body will always adjust to what you're putting it under. If you're going for a really hard effort, just slow it down. It's going to feel very difficult, but the body will eventually adjust. And then you can then get those quality kilometers towards the end instead of that very sloppy form where you're just holding on for dear life.
Sounds very familiar. I think everyone
Yep.
empathizes with when you're on the struggle street. It's really like that mental barrier, those hurdles in your mind, because the physical adaptation actually comes across really easily. It's the mind that's the big hurdle. It sounds like you'd agree with that, wouldn't you?
Definitely.
So off that, give us a summary of what a negative split is, because you're kind of hinting into that as a strategy. Could you summarize that for in lay terms?
Sure. So a negative split, something actually I tried last night. And this is when we're talking about the split is the per kilometer average. So for example, if you're running 3 kilometers, your split is going to be a time average based on your first kilometer, your second kilometer, and your third kilometer. So if you do your first kilometer in 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, then it'll find the average of that. And that's how you get your kilometer average. What the negative split is let's say your first kilometer would be a relatively slow kilometer, and then you progressively increase your pace. So then your speed becomes quicker. So you have a negative split, so slowly getting lower in that pace.
Yep.
So you're eventually getting faster. So those tend to be for people that tend to get pretty slow, exhausted towards the end. It's a good way to kind of get the body primed up for those hard efforts towards the end of your run, which I found a lot of success in yesterday. I actually had a pretty similar time starting really hard, but I found my form was really sloppy. That's what I used to do. And then last night I felt like I started comfortably, then finished quite strong and felt like it was a comfortable effort as well.
Perfect. So with the split there, along with the perceived effort, and aside from that, also is it's a negative split, the perceived exertion scale, and pacing yourself. It's all complementary, really, isn't it? So the last thing that we had was a bit more of a biomechanical thing on your blog post, which is talking about your foot contact. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So when I first began running, when I tried that 30-minute run over the 3 kilometers, I was very much a heel striker. So you can either have a rear foot striker or a forefoot striker. So kind of heel, or if you're using your toes, there are midfoot strikers as well where it's pretty even. So to begin with, I was more of a heel striker, and I felt like it's much more of an effort because you are pushing your foot much further in front of your body, and this tends to put a lot more load through the knees, and it's actually a bit more of an effort, I found personally. The second option, the forefoot striking, where you're kind of on your toes, a bit of midfoot as well, you're more looking to strike the ground underneath you as opposed to in front of you. And this one, first time I tried it, you'd find your calves get pretty sore after it because you're really plantar flexing, trying to really activate those calves there. So that really activates that. However, I did find it's a much more efficient, faster running for me. But when I delved into the research, it really looks like it's not about where you strike on the foot, the ground. So whether it's your rear foot or your forefoot, but more so where in relation to your body do you strike the ground. So if it's more in front, you'd find that's a bit of a harder effort, a bit more inefficient. But if you're striking underneath you, whether it's your heels or your forefoot, it actually tends to be the same time-wise.
Man, the thing that the adjective that comes to my mind when you're speaking about running is efficiency. Like pacing gives you efficiency. Giving your body a chance to achieve adaptation gives you efficiency, and your foot placement in foot strike gives you efficiency too. So when I look at runners that are really efficient, it just looks like they're gliding. It's like efficient swimmers. So I think when you are exploring your running, your trail running, you're looking at just turning the dial up towards efficiency. So what would you say given that this has been a couple of months into your running journey, what would your top 2 recommendations be to Mike of 6 months ago? What would you tell him now, knowing what you know?
So number 1 would be, you don't have to keep pushing as hard as you want. You could always just dial it back to get the run done and at least look half decent while doing it instead of extremely sloppy. And I guess that way I would have looked forward to other runs and been a bit more strict on my schedule. And the second thing would be definitely the foot striking. That was definitely a huge change for me once I learned how to do the forefoot striking. So those would be the top 2 things, the pacing and forefoot striking.
Perfect, Mike. Thanks for letting us in on a snapshot of your trail running experiments, like the mad scientist. And it'd be interesting to tap in say, the next 6 months and review what your running prowess has managed to grow into or evolve into. So before we run away, I'm just going to share my screen here, and I just want to point our viewers to where you can find all this great information. So if you go to www.prophysioplus.com.au, this is our great landing page. It will have our most recent podcast that's been published on our actual landing page. You've got an opportunity to opt into our weekly Pulse email, where once a week we just send you the latest and greatest happening within our health company. And then across our locations, you can book now. Here's the key point where you can find Mike's magic sauce for his running. It's this button here, and it'll take you straight to our blog posts. So feel free to jump in, refer to the blog post that we're talking about here with our In the Trenches video blogs, and you can have a lot more information there to digest what we're talking about. Okay, so check it out. A lot of great information. And the last little plug is that at the end of October, the 30th of October, Mike, myself, Con, and Avi, the team, are coming together to have a bit of a powwow on the theme of strength training. It's a roundtable discussion, and it'll be a chance for you to see how we may all have different ideas on strength training, but the eventual outcome is, we want to live positive, happy, healthy lives. So tune in on the 30th of October. But from now till then, enjoy your weekend, and as always, making healthy. See you guys.